My friends, to determine the true rulers of any society, you must ask yourself this one simple question. Who is it that I am not permitted to criticize?
When you're coming home, Daddy, I love you more.
What is it good for?
What is it good for? Absolutely. Sing it to me. Whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Biden is quite different than his predecessor, the cantankerous Donald Trump, who didn't cooperate with the powers that be. Trump was somewhat non-compliant. He was somewhat an irritation to the ones that put him in office. I mean, clearly, Trump was put into office kind of auspiciously. The polls back in 2016 had Hillary Clinton winning by an absolute landslide. There was no possible way Trump could ever win. And suddenly, Trump wins and he's the president. Now, why is that? Well, it's actually for the same reason that he now isn't the president. At that time in 2016, he was given the presidency because
Trump says he's a huge supporter of Israel, and that his actions show it. As part of his first trip abroad as president, Trump broke with past protocol and became the first sitting U.S. leader to visit Jerusalem's Wailing Wall. The Old City site, the holiest for Jews, sits on disputed territory claimed by both Israel and the Palestinians.
they hoped that Trump would have attacked Iran. But since he didn't attack Iran and he didn't start any major wars, he needed to go. So who replaced Trump? Well, non-compliance was replaced with the ultimate in compliance.
But I have to be more careful that I walk in, even including whether I sit down next to somebody and is not invited to sit down. So that's my responsibility. I have to be more aware, and it's totally legitimate for someone not to have to say, no, don't get in my private space. It's my job. It's my job to read that, no, this is space that no one wants me to invade.
Yeah.
Last night when I was in bed, supposed to be sleeping, I started thinking. I was wondering, what is the world's greatest invention? That's a good question. Is it electricity, or is it the telephone, or is it the airplane? And then it hit me. Without a doubt, the greatest invention of all time, the most brilliant invention of all time, is political correctness. What a brilliant thing. First of all, it affects different sectors of society in different ways. The enemy or the foe of the creator is the one who is affected the most, and it forces the adversary to censor himself. It is self-censorship. It is self-policing. What a brilliant thing to have your foe be forced to censor himself and have him look bad to society, very bad, criminally bad, if he misbehaves or doesn't behave the way you have decided that he should behave. It also causes a lot of trouble.
Israel has the right to defend itself. There is no equivalence between a terrorist group indiscriminately firing rockets at civilians and a country defending its people.
If I were to tell you that I watched a mouse attack a cat unprovoked, the cat was sleeping, this mouse was scrounging around in the kitchen looking for something to eat, spots the cat and goes after that cat and starts biting it. A tiny little mouse attacking a big cat unprovoked. I wonder how many of you would believe that. Probably no one. Yet almost everyone believes that the Palestinians attacked the Israelis in an unprovoked attack. Now, why is that? Well, because they're terrorists, you see. They're crazy. They want to die. They want their children to die. They want to watch their children die. They want to watch their parents die. They're crazy. They're terrorists, you see. They flew planes into the World Trade Center, and that's how the World Trade Center imploded to the ground. We've been told a lot of lies, and yet we tend to believe these lies because they are presented to us by the masters of manipulation.
But here's what happens. When the international community attacks Israel, they're actually encouraging Hamas to continue these attacks because Hamas says, it's great. We're both killing Israeli civilians and unfortunately some of ours, and they're happy with their own civilian casualties because it gets that the international community to focus their attacks on Israel instead of Hamas. That's wrong. Sure. It's both wrong and unproductive because actually what it does is prolong the conflict and escalate and increase the number of casualties that happen as a result of the
But the question is to respond to one other thing before we go, which is your domestic challenges. You are under investigation for bribery, fraud, breach of trust. You've also had some difficulty for failed attempts to put together a government in the last 23 months. This leads to the criticism that your current actions are basically an effort to stay in power. And what's your response to that?
That's preposterous.
Israel did not engage in an unprovoked attack on civilian areas in Palestinian-controlled territories. That's not what happened, guys. That's not what happened. A bunch of terrorists, and that's what they are, bloodthirsty terrorists, who question Israel's right to exist.
What's life like inside the world's biggest prison? To find out, you don't have to commit any crime. You just have to be born in Gaza. This tiny strip of flat, open Palestinian land, about 25 miles long and only 7 miles wide at its widest point, is surrounded by Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea to the south and west, and Israel, which has closed Gaza off to the outside world since the early 90s. Like many prisons, Gaza is overcrowded. In 2021, the population grew to over 2 million, with one of the highest population densities in the world. The only power plant was bombed. Travel was banned. Most imports and exports were blocked, forcing most of Gaza's factories to shut down. Fishermen couldn't fish beyond a very limited area. Supplies of fuel and electricity were reduced so much that people converted their cars to run on cooking oil. Even medical supplies were restricted. The Israeli government decided how much food would be let in by calculating how many calories everyone in Gaza would get. As a government advisor at the time said, the idea is to put the Palestinians on a diet, but not make them die of hunger.
This law that was passed in the Israeli government, by the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli parliament recently, is a very major law in the Israeli book of laws. First of all, it's a basic law, which means that it is not really part of the Israeli constitution because there is no constitution, but it is a quasi-constitutional law, and it can only be changed with a large majority in the parliament. It cannot be just changed like any other law. And the main issue, of course, is that this law says Israel is the state of the Jewish people. It's under the control of the Jewish people, not under the control of its own citizens. In 2017, the United Nations published a report about apartheid in Israel. And this is a very interesting report because it said apartheid is not just the legal system that the Israeli government is implementing in the occupied territory towards Palestinians who live without any citizenship and without any rights in a system which is very clearly a two-tiered apartheid system, one law for the Israeli colonists, one law for the local population. No, it said apartheid is also inside the borders of Israel. It's also apartheid between different levels of citizenship of Israelis. Jewish Israelis or Palestinian Israelis do not have the same rights. The United States put a lot of pressure on the United Nations, and General Secretary Antonio Guterres decided to censor the report, to erase it. So this group of Israeli politicians said, no, we want to make it very clear that Israel is Jewish first, democratic second. There is a distinction. There is a hierarchy. And the Jewishness is more important than the democracy. That was a very important reason for promoting the law. But the law was not brought up for a vote in 2011, and not in the last 7 years that passed, because the Israeli government said we don't really need to make a decision on the issue of democracy versus Judaism. We can leave it ambiguous. We can have all the kind of policies that we want, and many of these very discriminatory policies against Palestinian citizens of Israel have been in place without any problems for decades. Why should we put it down in a law that will expose our policies as unjust, as racist, as discriminatory? We have nothing to gain from that.
All of the major networks in the United States are owned and controlled by the same entity. For example, Fox News is owned by Rupert Murdoch. Do you really think Murdoch is a conservative? Now, Murdoch, he owns another company besides Fox News. He owns HarperCollins Christian Publishing. Now, who are they? It's an old Scottish publishing firm that started, I think, back in the 1600s or maybe the 1700s. He bought that out, and he publishes 97% of all the Bibles. So now you know why the Bible Belt of America is so highly, highly, highly pro-Israel. Have a great day.